Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary. Today, this week's Dev Diary is called the Officer Core Recap and AI Improvements, which is going to be looking at some basically finalised look at the Officer Core system, as well as talking about how the AI has changed in the what will be a free patch coming to No Step Back. In truth, we've gone through so many Dev Diaries now, it's becoming hard to keep up with what the timescale would be. There's no sight or hearing of a release date, and no streams have been announced which will be showing any content coming. So to say whether we're coming close to the end, halfway towards the finish line, or barely getting started, I truly can't tell you. All we can do now is just wait and head into the Dev Diary. So the Dev Diary begins by talking about how previously there's been focuses on features, whether that would be a focus tree for a country, or a system they're introducing, like trains, or artillery trains, or whatever it's going to be, the Officer Core system. They always have a singular topic of discussion. Moving forward, they're less so going to be talking about core systems, and more so giving a general overview of updates and things they've changed, moving towards finalised versions of the features they've currently released. One would hope that means we're getting closer towards a finished DLC that's going to be released with a release date, but again, as nothing's been said, we simply don't know. What I also wonder is whether that means we'll be getting more updates in regards to updated focus trees. We've had an updated one for Poland and a reworked monarchist one for Russia too, so maybe the Baltics will get another going over. I guess we'll find out. Regardless, this week's Dev Diary is talking about the finalised version, just about, of the Officer Core system, which is opened up with this image showing what, generally speaking, it will probably look like. In truth, not too many core changes. We can see the original way that the advisors work into this, as well as generals being used to create army experience. We also see the spirits you get towards the army, the navy and the air force, as well as the new way that doctrines are researched using the in-officer core system as opposed to a research slot. So the first thing they bring notice to is that the branch chiefs, theorists and military high command are also now visible on the officer core screen, as we just showed, but they will still be available on the country overview screen where you would change things like your economy law and your conscription law, so you have both options available, so returning players won't be so confused and be like, where have all my advisors gone? Where's the high command? Where's it all disappeared to? You'll have the choice to pick between either. We can also see in the military high command screen how there's been a change towards costs relating to the expertise of the generals you're assigning. So here we can see the experts on the left all cost 100 political power, but will require you to allocate 20 command power points. So maybe the less knowledgeable ones require more army dedication to specifically get them to work. Meanwhile, on the top right, we see Erwin Rommel as a genius who doesn't require as much allocation with only 10 command power points, but requiring 200 political power. In this regard, having to do the trade-offs between, juggling political power, juggling how much command power you want to spend, is something you'll have to play with and is directly now related to the expertise of your commanders. So moving on, we now see that branch advisors now give daily experience gain, which adds to the many things that give you daily experience gain with the officer core. Previously it was just training units as well as military theorists that gave you it. Oh, and I suppose you could send an attaché if you so desired, but now with all of these things you'll kind of have a nice passive generation of experience. This is going to be pretty important because, as we heard, there are going to be changes towards doctrines. They no longer require you to research them with a research tab, which is good because, goodness, they basically just took up a research slot for free. But now they're assigned to the officer core, and with the change, they're also going to require a doctrine cost with your experience. So this passive income of experience can be spent on researching doctrines. In this regard, I think there's going to be a noticeable change that anything that can generate some passive army experience, or even things to do with command power really, I'm thinking China, may have more of an opportunity to gain a slightly earlier advantage in regards to maybe doctrines and building up an army, because previously you really only got this stuff once you had gotten into a war, unless you'd spent that initial PP on a theorist. We then get a quick reminder talking about the spirits that you can get for Army, Navy and Air Force. These are just unique buffs that will sort of, I think, characterize the way you're planning your army to work. So there'll be buffs maybe towards defense, speed, mobilization, stuff like that. And so here we see something which I think is really cool to see in its own form. As we know, because your generals can now be assigned into your officer corps to generate, let's say, passive XP, as well as give you various different buffs, the manner by which you give the individual character an upgrade also translates into the officer corps. So here we see an explanation. Here we can see a certain German general who's about to get Fortress Buster. Once he gets this, his military high command role will gain an artillery specialist, which I think gives you passive attack and defense towards artillery. I think this 100% will play an impact in the way people will interact with, well, specifically the Spanish Civil War, making sure you've picked the right general which can go to Spain and farm XP to get a very specific trait so that you can stick him into your military high command to gain the buffs you need for generating that passive XP is kind of like a big deal. Before, I mean, it was a big enough deal to train your generals anyway, but this just adds an extra layer of importance to what you need to do. Okay, and with that we cover the important stuff to do with the officer corps. So mostly just a recap, but there is some stuff in there that's changed, and it really does highlight the importance of the officer corps in changing, I think, how the meta of building up in the early stages is going to work, especially for Soviets, Germans and Italians. So as for the next bit, we're talking about AI, and I will not deny I'm no expert in the inner workings of the Hearts of Iron 4 AI, but I'm always willing to learn a bit better about how this game is operating. So with No Step Back, they've said that hopefully with some changes to the way the AI prioritizes areas and committing its forces, there's going to be some hopefully improvements in certain areas regarding combat. The first thing they talk about is the use of specialized divisions. So previously, I know I've definitely seen this, you'll find that the AI will just stick practically any troop on any border, regardless of combat type, regardless of composition, it doesn't matter, just stick it all on the front line and be done with it. And hopefully now that means that with the changes coming with No Step Back, the AI will stick more appropriate units on more appropriate front lines. So you'll see mountaineers, preferably in the mountains and not clogging up flatlands where they don't need to be, as well as armour divisions probably going to places where they'll do offensive fronts as opposed to just sort of sitting around guarding ports or whatever it is they're doing. The next thing they talk about is unit weight distribution, which is making sure that AI sticks units in places it needs to stick units. They describe this as being ports and coasts, which is going to be a nightmare if you enjoyed invading Britain with nobody guarding a port. I know I did. But regardless, hopefully, they say, the AI will know exactly where it needs to stick units and where its more weaker areas are going to be, as well as making sure that when it does stick units in certain places, it's not completely funneling its supply line to do so. So in an example that they give to describe a way that the AI is going to make more let's say logical decisions about where to do things, they've shown here the Eastern Front, where Germany is pushing towards a victory, but it has noticed that the supply is dipping where it less needs to be. So hopefully, with the reworks coming with No Step Back, Germany will know that yes, supply is going down, but because the capitulation rate is so close, they should forget about supply and just push towards the finish line regardless, which I suppose is getting closer to the sort of callous nature of the Germans as they push into the Russians. But anyway, the totality is, regardless of whether there could be supply or maybe issues regarding the way that the troops are moving, if there are other variables to consider, such as an enemy that has far more units than you, you're going to have to stick more units on that border, otherwise they're just going to overrun you. And the AI should be able to recognise whether that's happening and counter it efficiently. Okay, the next ones are pretty straightforward, but we'll go through them. Naval invasions means that the AI should hopefully have some better concept of when to do naval invasions, with less focus on just consistently sending the same naval invasion over and over again until it gets to work. I'm looking at Italy and I'm looking at Greece because I've definitely played as Greece, and Italy will not budge until they've landed. So hopefully now they'll move over to like one very powerful naval invasion which has all the organisation planned, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, they're not going to hammer the wall in trying to do it. The AI has also got some measures to look at countering units, making sure to consider when the right time is to switch a template, to choose perhaps to go from one type of tank to another, or switch their artillery over to make sure they've got the best artillery, without necessarily jeopardising their equipment. And lastly, they talk about buffer fronts, which they describe as sort of a pre-planned area of defence that the AI will recognise as being significant for ensuring that countries don't fall and supply lines are kept up. They use a heat map to show this, where we can see that Alexandria in Egypt and I think a little part of Libya, as well as the United Kingdom in Cornwall, Wales and the Midlands, have been designated as areas of defence so that they make sure that units head there, not necessarily to defend Britain, but when an invasion happens or when something happens with Greece, they have an ample amount of units nearby to be able to defend it. So for example, the reason Britain has got so much heat is not necessarily because they're terrified that Cornwall is going to be imminently invaded, but they're prepared for Operation Overlord, so that when Britain moves into France, the Americans have units stationed in Cornwall that can just hop across the English Channel and head straight into France, as opposed to having to cross all the way across the Atlantic every time that a naval invasion is successful, and then heading all the way back to America again. The same applies for in Egypt, where they're defending Greece, and you don't want to funnel all of your units into Greece because you'll completely destroy the supply line. But there is room in Egypt for them to hold out, so we can see that the American units are travelling into Egypt, preparing to hold and help Greece where necessary. In addition, and I know this isn't very relevant, but have you seen these Hungary borders over here? It's like it's eating up a part of Slovakia. I don't think I've ever seen a Hungary that quite looks like that. Okay, and with that wraps up this week's Dev Diary. So kind of a short overview of things we've already seen, but it definitely gives us some more information about how things are changing and some strategies and metas that might change as we move forward. Okay, so with that, I won't keep you any longer. I'll say thank you very much for watching. If you liked, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. I know this is the part where I say bye, but I was just thinking, you know the bear you can get for Poland is specifically, like, isn't he a military one? Does that mean that you can stick him in the core? Because I'm thinking like, you know, Caligula with his horse. And you make the bear a member of military high command. How deep does Voltec go? Oh God. Oh God. Bye.